Hello and welcome to the Roundtable Podcast. My name is Rafi. Joining me today is NSA Watches Me Jackoff. Today we're going to be talking about how the DEA is a front agency for the CIA that recruits people by compromising them with drugs, then feeds them to ETs, MKUltra, false flag conspiracies, counteragencies, and other government conspiracies. Please follow us on the Roundtable Podcast YouTube channel. Please join us on the Roundtable Discord, follow our other 4 YouTube channels, join our BitChute, and check out our merch store. Without further ado, NSA, how are you doing, my friend?
Some days are easier than others. I'm doing all right.
Well, let's make this night a good one. So, do you want to start us off with how the DEA is a front agency for the CIA that recruits people and feeds them to ETs?
Yeah, so the DEA has been kicked out of some states already because of them fucking around. I think Minnesota is one of them. In California, they got this chick who was like, she was in her 20s for weed, and basically what they do is they will get you on a low-level crime like a misdemeanor, and some weed stuff is a felony because for whatever reason. And instead of arresting you, what they'll do is they will say, all right, we won't arrest you if you do this for us, etc. So this girl in California did this, and they were trying to get her to like buy some cocaine for some higher level drug guys or whatever, and they fucking shot her and killed her. So like the DEA is many incidents of this going on to try and infiltrate or just get cases on people, et cetera, going on. But this is how cops work in general. This isn't just DEA, but because DEA recruits from cops, FBI recruits from cops, CIA recruits from cops. So it takes a certain kind of mindset to want to be a cop and protect your community, and then it takes another kind of mindset to try and, get into the secret world that they involve themselves in these agencies. So it's a complete like shit show when it comes to like anybody that has any morality or ethics, knowing what kind of organization you're going to be a part of. But these organizations are doing this. It's part of their business model because their business model relies on cases, and they don't get funding unless they show that they have a need for funding to get to these cases. So if they can't find cases, they will figure out how to work with the CIA to figure out how to find cases. And instead of cartels, like Gina Haspel once said publicly, quote, it's our new mission at the CIA to end the drug epidemic. And that was a year and a half ago. And last year, there were 93,000 overdoses, which is the most there's ever been. So on fentanyl and other drugs. So clearly we have a system where the people that are in charge of it are either incompetent, don't care, or are in on the swindle.
Wow. Do you want to go more into the types of people that they recruit for these agencies from the police force?
Well, I mean, cops do what they do, and it takes a certain kind of person to want to run as an authority figure in the world. So as a low-level cop, you're making like 60,000 something a year, maybe a little more, depending on your rank and all this stuff. So you're not like rich, and you are putting yourself on the line. But at the same time, cops have 50% of cops are wife beaters, literally. 80% of counterintelligence, as they go up, and all this counterintelligence shit's recruited out of the same system. 80% of them, 80% divorce rate. So there's something going on within the mindset of the protectors that we've, Teddy. We're having a podcast right now. There's something going on within the lifestyle of these protectors that is different, I guess, or another side of things that a lot of people don't get to see. Now, I don't hate all cops. I don't hate all DEA. I think that they're just humans too, but they're part of a system that. So for cops, for example, they don't want to recruit cops that are above like 110 IQ, because if you have a higher IQ than that, you're going to question authority and question what's going on. So like you get to a certain point where you're part of a system, but you're so gung ho about being like the good guy and the patriot and et cetera, et cetera. The methodology for finding these kinds of people that would be qualified seems to be lingering, because what we have going on in the DEA and CIA around the alien cover-up and everything else that's going on is a complete fucking shit show. And so if I know that these people are running such a shit show at the top, you know, what are they getting from the bottom? Like,
So what are some of the things that the DEA is running in relation to these people that they're recruiting?
there's a book, I cannot remember the title of it. It's an audiobook you can find online about the DEA and the CIA's relationship and how they've been, you know, the crack epidemic of the 80s and all this stuff was heavily CIA influenced. And so DEA does stuff overseas too. Like, it's not that they're just like a American agency or whatever, but it's the Drug Enforcement Agency. And they were created, I think it was by Nixon, to solve so the history of it goes, 1964, the United Nations created something called the schedule system for narcotics or chemicals itself. So schedule 1, 2, and 3. One means no medicinal value. 2 has some medicinal value, and so forth. So like meth, heroin, schedule 2. Marijuana was schedule 1. And there's a lot of people within the Nixon administration. There's even, you can Google it online and find some quotes from it, talking about how the war on drugs was created to infiltrate minorities, i.e. black people at the time, and hippies and dissidents. So they used, because they knew all these dissidents and anybody that was like against the government was doing marijuana or smoking weed. And so if you make it Schedule 1, and so hold on, it was 1964 for the United Nations. Richard Nixon signed it into American law, I believe in 1973, to create the schedule system within the United States, and later gave the authority to the DEA to then enforce whatever they want with drugs. And this means using informants. This means using low-level guys to buy stuff for you just to find out who's selling, et cetera, because it's a whole like system they had to crack, which they obviously can't fucking figure out. And then at the time, there were things like the mafia. There was things like gangs were starting up, like Bloods and Crips were starting to pop up, and all these like actual like bikers too. For example, like the Banditos, and the leader of the Banditos got busted last year for narcotics trafficking, or 2 years ago, and Hell's Angels and all this stuff. So like there's these underground world being influenced, manipulated, and infiltrated by the DEA, the CIA, and all facets of, you know, culture, as it were. And so there's just like this shitstorm going around with the war on drugs that it ended up turning the United States into the world's largest penal colony. And it's because of the war on drugs, it's because of the laws around it, and it's because of the culture that they recruited within these systems of cops, DEA, and et cetera, and FBI and all that. So they created a culture within their system. They told that culture to attack the other culture, and then they manipulated it from the back end through using agencies.
Warden, can you close your mic, please? Thanks. Wow. So the whole point of using this war on drugs is to do what?
Well, so drugs have been used for geopolitical reasons for a long time. And the opium wars in the 1800s was used by the central banking system to kind of topple and control China. So they flooded their culture with opium. That's why the whole, like, you know, cliche about opium dens and stuff was there, because they've you know, that was going on. There's something called in the Vietnam called the Golden Triangle. So there's the CIA Air America and a bunch of things going on during that era, working with warlords and stuff over there. You remember a movie called American Gangster? Like, there's some backdrops to the American Gangster concept, that the U.S. military was somehow involved within the narcotics trafficking over in America. So there's an entire interlink. And then the Contras, if you recall any of the Iran-Contra stuff under Oliver North, that was dealing with selling cocaine to fund guns, you know, for the Contras, for, you know, revolution and shit like that. And it's been a weird clusterfuck. So a lot of what was going on in the counterculture movement of the 60s was heavily influenced by the Central Intelligence Agency. They were manufacturing these drugs and they were doling it out. There's a lot of Grateful Dead stuff and discussions around, you know, not only testing on this stuff but filtering it to the system. And it's my theory that the counterculture movement of the 60s died off because of methamphetamine. So they were all doing LSD and smoking weed and chilling out in San Francisco, and then the bikers and other cultures were selling meth to these people, making them paranoid, hypersexualized, which had a lot of like sex crime going on as a result, all kinds of stuff. And to the backdrop of why I believed methamphetamine was used specifically, there's a little backstory to that. So methamphetamine from 1930 to 1950, the United States used to, the psychiatrists of the United States used to give it to people for depression. So for 20 years, they were given that instead of like an SSRI. And so got a bunch of people addicted to uppers there. On top of that, the U.S. Air Force was giving amphetamines, Disoxin from the Bayer Corporation, to pilots up until 1967. So these pilots were effectively on meth, flying long missions and stuff like that. So we got them addicted. Special Forces and all those guys, they were giving them meth so that they could last longer, fight harder, etc., which is rational sense. But in the 60s, all of the meth dealing that was going on was a result of like biker gangs and other things that were going on. And these were all guys that were forced addicted to this drug because of the Army. So the Army created this problem that then got filtered through the entire country. And as you know, methamphetamine is a huge problem around many places. Now, the problem was created, the addictions were created, the communities were created. Now we have high-end quality stuff coming in from outside the country, like from cartels in Mexico and so forth. The cartels working with gangs out here to do what they're doing. And there's all kinds of gangs. You can pull up all every state has like a Department of Corrections list of crimes and gangs and models and stuff like that you can look at. And it's profound, and it's part of culture right now because of what was happening in the time. And then we can talk about how the Nazis were using meth all day and all that shit. But so once you're comfortable using one illicit substance that's going to get you in trouble, you're fine using all the other ones, and people just tested and experimented. I'm in college, and so it just became this thing. And the DEA has done abso-fucking-lutely nothing to protect American culture from this, other than destroy families with like 10-year crack sentences and bullshit that comes along with petty possession charges. Like on occasion they'll get big busts, and that's great, and hopefully that's what their goal is. But while trying to get those big busts, they recruit and destroy families on the way to the top, and they don't care.
Wow. And are they doing this just to feed them to ETs, or for that and political reasons?
Well, so secondary, I think ETs was a consideration of the LSD stuff. So psychedelics were being used because when you use a psychedelic, you're more open to suggestion. So and if you hear voices like on LSD, you're not going to think it's anything but you're tripping when it might be an alien doing it. So the CIA, there's episodes in the X-Files about this, how they would find people to effectively feed to them to test these drugs on, like MKUltra and stuff like that, using hookers to dose their tricks. So it's my theory, and I think it's, if the aliens have been around as long as they have, working with our government, that the CIA was doling out the drugs to the public and then letting the aliens target and play with the people they targeted.
So they did that with LSD and meth, and was crack as well.
Yeah, all of it. There's a CIA part of the Minds of Men research documentary. They talk about it, how there's 70 known chemicals the CIA has that increase or decrease telepathy. And if you know anything about ayahuasca, as you know, it's a potent psychedelic, dimethyltryptamine. Ayahuasca was originally known as telepathine. That was what they called it. So the CIA was doing research on chemicals that increase or decrease telepathy, and telepathy was, as we know about how the microwave auditory effect and a lot of synthetic telepathy that humans have developed. It's my theory that they were basically feeding these people with drugs that increase or decrease telepathy so that the ET could test, target, recruit, experiment, send to the madhouse, whatever they needed to do.
Interesting. Let me check our talking points here since we've went over our first one. You kind of went into MKUltra a little bit just now. Do you want to go more into MKUltra specifically?
Well, so most of the documentation was destroyed, so there really isn't much out there. There was one CIA officer in the 70s who remembered the location of like a financials that had references to it, and they went and found those documents. And so that's what everything we know about MKUltra is from that. Is George Bush Sr. had it all burned, had it all destroyed, because it was such a human rights violation. If as we know, just a little bit we saw how terrible and disgusting it was. The fact that government was paying to have human beings experimented on like actual fucking animals, sexually abusing them, all kinds of shit, just to see what would happen. And it didn't really stop. They just went into private contractors. So the private contractors, you might not be a CIA guy, but you're contracted by the CIA and obviously, you know, paid for and controlled by them, paid well too. There's all kinds of money in the world going into the alien cover-up and to the people that are targeted by aliens.
Yeah. Well,
and I literally mean all the money in the world, as in everybody with monetary interests on planet Earth is tuned into the alien story and in some way understanding or funding the experiments and research going into what's going on, because the ETs are targeting the rich as well. They're not just targeting the poor.
So what are some of the things that we do know about MKUltra from the limited files?
It's just all kinds of shit that's like, so like MKUltra is all about suggestion. It was about dosing them with LSD, using flashing lights, using symbols, like, you know, you remember the movie Clockwork Orange, right? Where they would sit the guy in front of a bunch of flashing pictures and try and synchronize sound so that Beethoven's the Ninth to really bad things. So you would get physically ill if you heard Beethoven's the Ninth. So it's shit like that. It was trying to condition through things like Pavlov. If you know what Pavlov, you know, the dog experiments where you could train a dog where if they would hear a certain whistle, they would salivate. So they'd have a physical emotional response to sound. And that's why a lot of MKUltra, the only real way to do it is through this ET telepathy thing, in my opinion. You can't really do it just humans fucking around with humans. You got to have the ETs involved.
Why?
Because like a biological mammal, we are Pavlovian in that we can be triggered to certain words. Like words carry emotions that we will then think about. So like the technique devised by Dr. Ewan Cameron. So Dr. Ewan Cameron was a Scottish psychotherapist that was trained in Switzerland in 1927, and then he ended up leading the Canadian psychiatric, whatever, the head of psychiatry for both Canada and America. And he was there's plenty of links that have been shown that he's been sued and all this other stuff for research and experiments. He devised something called psychic driving, where they would put a football helmet over their head and repeat messages over and over, like 1,000 or 1,000,000 times, to try and de-pattern the mind and condition them. So they would use mind-altering chemicals in conjunction with auditory stimuli and even some visual stimuli to try and either condition or brainwash someone. So basically, if you played the same message 1 billion times while they were fucked up on chemicals, and then you let them out of the psych ward, and then all of a sudden some agent calls them on the phone and says that word, that's what's called a trigger word. So that trigger word would flash the emotional response of all the what's called trauma. So trauma-based mind control, they would traumatize the person with a certain trigger, and then they would activate them through that method.
Holy shit. Can you talk more about the mind control efforts?
Well, so schizophrenics report they hear voices, right? And a lot of schizophrenics that claim they're targeted individuals, they can tell you down to the day they started hearing voices, and they can tell you what they're hearing voices about. And so it's my theory that the ETs, through this advanced technology they have to send voices to your head, are trying to condition and train people at distance that they target through this implantation that they do, and turn the person's head into a radio receiver, so they're constantly beaconing to them messages, trying to condition or input suggestion, and so forth. And some people are more suggestible, like lower intelligence people are suggestible, drug users are very more suggestible. There's a lot of ways that can create, you know, a level of higher suggestion, because people that are hearing voices, a lot of times they don't want to explain to others they're hearing voices, because they don't want to, you know, the stigma of schizophrenia that's been built up. Because if you say you're hearing voices, that's a symptom of schizophrenia. There's a lot of other symptoms of schizophrenia too. There are people called just voice hearing schizophrenics, by the way, where they don't have any delusions, they're grounded, etc., but they just hear voices. So that happens. And I think those are the people that just don't take to the conditioning, because there's a lot of people that believe in the delusions that they're told, or, you know, that they're special, they're important, they're Christ-like, they're a prophet, you know, this is the voice of God, etc., etc. So. Which is a link to why I think a lot of Catholics have invested heavily in psych wards and psychiatric help, because the Catholics, I don't think they really understand. They may understand the link between the aliens or not, and that's fine, but they do believe in God, and they believe in the devil, and they believe in demons. And so these people that are going to psych wards, they believe are possessed demonically, right? So they have a whole system of exorcism and all that stuff. So I think they were investing in psych wards because they knew that there was a link between the demons, the ability to mind control, and what's called Jesuit mind control, which is where a lot of this comes from. The CIA just kind of like scienced the fuck out of it.
And what's Jesuit mind control?
Monarch mind control, the stuff that was coming out of the Nazis, and all kinds of stuff. It's my theory. You can call this quackery if you want, and that's fine. So when there's a billion Catholics on Earth. So when the Catholics and the colonists were going around to the world, what would happen is where the priest was at in that city of where they were trying to colonize, the ETs would go and possess somebody, or they would play a demonic possession, drive the person crazy. They'd be having all these symptoms, talking in tongues, screaming, going, what the fuck, etc. And so the town or tribe, you know, in South America or North, wherever it is, or any place, the priest would come exorcise them. And so if the priest exorcises them, the whole town now thinks that the priest actually did that, and there's some kind of spiritual connection to it. So it's my theory that the Catholics were working not on purpose, because they might have actually thought it was demons. Who the fuck knows? Obviously, they didn't think it were gray aliens. That these demons that were possessing people with this technology were actually spiritually possessed. Because I have full belief that the ETs have been around for a long time, and that they've been playing God with people for a long time, and that's their game on Earth, is playing around with people's religious mindsets. Because it's very emotionally triggering when you talk about revelations and all the things that come with religion. And I believe that the Catholics and the Jesuit order, and by proxy the Masons, were working heavily within this mystery school concept of Gnosticism that wasn't real Christianity. It was this like dead gods of Egypt crap, but it was all linked together through the same ET group.
Very interesting. Crazy stuff. So we've talked about what you think is the real stuff. Would you like to go over some false flag conspiracies that you don't think are legit?
There's tons of it, man. I mean, a lot of the ufology stuff out there is a big disinformation campaign. There's a lot of UFO Jesuses like Wilcock, Greer, and so forth that are being fed all kinds of stories. There's, companies like MUFON who are reporting, people are reporting to them, UFO and abduction reports and experiences. So imagine if the CIA is going around dosing people, and then they do what's called a military lab abduction scenario, which is when the military does a false abduction working with the aliens to make the person think that they've been abducted or had an experience and so forth. So things like shapeshifters, for example. So shape-shifting can be explained to these ETs have advanced projection technologies. They're called a projected kinetic hologram, and they can literally overlay when you're on a chemical or when you're under the influence or even if you're just tired. They can overlay images to you while you're staring at somebody to think that they're shape-shifting. So I think that entire psyop that comes out of ufology came from people being targeted and fucked around with by this projection technology. And it just became part of UFO lore as a result. So I think that is a complete false flag as far as a concept.
Any others?
I personally don't believe in near-death experiences either. I think if these ETs have been around doing this, they're going to the ERs and they're finding people that are dying and they want to read their minds and test on them while they're dying. And some don't die and they come back with near-death experiences.
Do you think they test on people like once they're dead? Like, does that extend to like testing on souls or something?
No, like if you're a scientist and you want to learn all the science about humanity and their life and death cycle and so forth, you would be most definitely testing on people that are dying. And you know, there's lots of studies to show that the body releases DMT when they're dying. You know, and this is like the spirit molecule that they want to link to some spirituality. Which, by the way, the current DMT research from Dr. Strassman, or is it Grassman or Strassman? I don't remember. Anyway, it's funded by the Scottish Rite Masons. The Scottish Rite Masons are funding the research on DMT research. It's gone into more stuff now with psilocybin, and there's a lot of government agencies that are approving research. But the initial funding for DMT, and I believe it was because these guys in the Masons think they're part of the craft and they're all like spiritual and shit. They think they're all tapped into some shit that they have no idea about. They're controlling the release of the spiritual information around psychedelics. So I think a lot of the psychedelic research that's government funded or focused is heavily manipulated so that the public, while interacting with the entities or the ETs, refer to it in the manner that they want. So like the current psilocybin research going on right now, there was a guy on Joe Rogan the other day, or no, Lex Friedman's podcast, who's doing government research with it. And they talk about entities, and they say, don't act scared of the entities, act interested in them while you're on psilocybin. So we have a doctor that I believe knows about the aliens, who knows that this entity is not an entity, it's just projection technology trying to fuck around with their head. I believe these doctors know this. They're telling people to act interested in the entities to see what the entity can do to research and learn how to control them or learn how to manipulate or suggest, etc. So I think they're actually continuing MKUltra, but in government-funded, approved projects, because the current information around psychedelics is that it can help with things like PTSD and quitting smoking and all these things that are very good. But under that cover, they're now able to have them interact with ETs to help the ETs research humans more.
Cool. Do you think we should open it up to a discussion? See if anyone else has anything they want to ask about any of this?
Yeah.
All right. If anyone has anything they'd like to add or ask NSA, you guys can go ahead. If not, I'll keep asking them a couple more questions. So,
oh well, when we dig into ufologies, there's all kinds of stuff like the kids with black eyes, I believe ghosts. I think all ghost interaction and poltergeist interaction is extraterrestrial through this projection technology, through not only synthetic telepathy but projected kinetic holograms. So I think I think tweakers seeing shadow people when they're being targeted aren't seeing shadow people. It's the ET fucking around with them. So, because I mean, who's going to believe somebody on drugs? What they saw, they'll say it was drugs. So there's plausible deniability under any circumstance that what they had was a real interaction. That's where DA comes in too, because they find people that are dealing and using drugs to have fed to the system that targets them to play around with their heads.
crazy. It all just wraps all around and back together, and I do understand why the ET aspect is so important, because it just doesn't seem to add up unless you add that aspect.
Yeah, if anyone else has any questions, I'd definitely be open to it, but
Yeah, I do.
sure.
So, NSA, how long have the aliens been trying to control the Earth for?
I don't know that they're trying to control the Earth, but I know that they're here, and they're here in a form that the paperclip Nazis and people that were in World War II discuss how they got help from other worlds. And we have, if we understand that they have projected kinetic holograms that can appear as entities, and if we understand that they can talk to you at a distance through the microwave auditory effect, through synthetic telepathy, then a lot of what's going on in theology and the occult matches up to what that interaction was. So if you're sitting around doing a ritual summoning and having a seance summoning a demon, and all of a sudden this giant fucking hologram of a demon pops in, you're going to believe it's a fucking demon if you're a dumb human, which is, the case, hundreds of years ago. So these witches, these people that were doing, like, I just think that the interaction of the occult is the extraterrestrial connection that's been going on, and a lot of people believe that too. A lot of Christians think aliens are demonic, and Aleister Crowley talks about how his interaction with Lamb said, "We used to be known as demons. Tomorrow will be something else." Well, they're demons because that's their method to play around. If we look back to Babylonian times, if you look through all the demons that are listed in there, the Jewish demons that are there. All the concepts of demons almost appear to exist to not only play with a person, target them, or teach them a lesson. So there's a demon called Sulak. I love this one because it's hilarious. So Sulak is a Babylonian demon of the lavatory. He would appear to you while you're taking a shit, to tell you to wash your hands or some shit after you're done taking a shit. But that was a real demon in Babylonian times. Somebody witnessed this and then put it down into text, and it became lore. And so I think that interaction between ETs and humans has been going on all over the place in theology, from prophets, to demons, to the occult, to all of it. That's their game on Earth with humans. So I think they've been not only trying to control humans or figure out how to better control them, but they're also working with our governments and secret projects to the extent where they now have even more control, because the current system of government is confined under a concept of mutually assured destruction. So if war breaks out, we're all dead. Like Russia has 7,000 nukes, we have 6,000. There's 9 countries with nukes. So if real war breaks out, we're all kind of fucked. So they have the perfect and if they can hack our nukes, which everybody has discussions of them doing, they're kind of not in control, but they can manipulate world events as a result of the fear factor involved in initiating a mutually assured destruction scenario. And so they kind of got people by the balls. They don't control us, but there's a bunch of dudes in military and government that can't actually reasonably do anything about it because they could just set off our nukes.
Okay, so if I got you correctly, it was that all the spiritual experiences in the past are from aliens, and therefore aliens have been here so long as there has been spiritual experiences. Is that it?
It's part of it, but I don't mean all, but a lot, and I think most can be explained by this interaction. Yeah.
Okay, but like we have worship of entities, gods and demons or whatever from before we could even write. So
Well, we have animism, we have, all the way back to shamanism, to Zoroastrianism, to dualism. There's all kinds of theological interactions with either the divine or something not of this world, like Apollo, and you're a big fan of Hermes, right? So that's like the concept that this creature or this being came from outer space to provide knowledge and fire to the humans so that they could then, so there, and these humans were interacting with something to create this entity concept. And I think that the aliens just get carried away with how much, I don't know, I guess fun they could have with it, because they could just play games with people all day, playing entities and playing off the human beings' ontologies. And so I believe a lot of the interaction, a lot of the entities that became to be worshipped, a lot of the gods that came to be worshipped, somebody saw it, somebody was then telling other people about it, and it became part of culture. And if need be, there would be rituals to, like, call forth this entity so that they could come out and interact with humans, like, like Moloch and all this other Canaanite shit, Marduk and all this other stuff going on. Like, somebody was interacting with something to get these stories. It wasn't just some dude going, smoking weed on the mountains of fucking the Himalayas, talking to Nirvana or some shit. Something was interacting with them, and I believe it was extraterrestrials through this projection technology.
I see. I have one other. Actually, I have two questions, if you don't mind, but I'll just go with one for now. What is the? Do you know what the goal or objective of these entities are?
The current one is world order, which would make sense in a world of mutually assured destruction where everyone has nukes and high-end technology. I would assume that world order is what they want. I mean, I could be wrong. They do seem to like to slaughter us and have us fight each other and stuff like that. We have Albert Pike's discussions of creating 2 world wars, and then we'll unleash the atheists, and then they'll come under the doctrine of Lucifer. Well, there is a cult of 3 million people on Earth called the Masons that believe in this, or at least partially believe in it. A lot of them don't like Albert Pike because of how much out there he was to the public through morals and dogma, but I believe that they think of this because they're interacting with an entity that is projecting the mystery schools of Egypt, or all this high-end interaction. So yeah, I think you could call it, blame the Masons and all this crap. Well, they're dealing with something that isn't spiritual, that they project to us as spiritual. They tell us this interaction spiritual when they're in on the secret at this point.
Just a follow-up question. If they have been here for however many years, thousands of years, why have they not? And also, if we take into consideration a huge technological advantage and a huge time advantage, with respect to where we were thousands of years ago, why have they not accomplished their task? Like, what do you think they haven't been able to accomplish? Something that Alexander the Great almost did on his own. Like, why haven't they been able to do it with their insane technology a long time ago?
Because their interaction with us is at distance. They're not going to land and do things. They're just going to talk to you at distance and play around with. They've got a lot of time on their hands, man. They don't care. Like, they don't care the way that humans care. They don't see that, like, our families are going to be affected and all this other stuff. They don't have that same consideration. I don't believe they have families. I think they're like a clone race for all I know. I don't think they have the same emotional connection. It's like in the last MI6 James Bond movie, they talk about how orphans are the best recruits. Well, that would make sense because they have less connection to regular society. These creatures are so detached from human society, they don't view things the same as us. They just view us as playthings, and they don't understand the ramifications or what's called the blowback of their actions to people on Earth. They think that they are so far above us that we won't have any influence with each other, that they have the entire false reality control that they need through their billion Catholics, their Muslims, and everything else that goes on with religion, and Masons, etc. That they don't really need to focus on the fact that humanity is understanding what they've done and understanding what they're doing and putting connecting the dots. And now that we have the internet, we only had it for 30 years, so there's I could literally access the Library of Alexandria from my mom's garage. Like this. The information of the ancients is at my fingertips, or at our fingertips, and they still have in their heads that they can control the reality with the people that they do it to the public, and it's just it doesn't work anymore. Plus, the way they treat us is like actual dog shit. The ETs treat humans like actual fucking dog shit. They target people that are, having problems. So they target people that they think they can control. They target housewives. They don't care. And they will just play around with them all day, even if they don't want to play around with them. They have no respect for our human rights, our individuality, or sovereignty. But we have built a society built on that concept, on literal Bill of Rights in the United States. So they want to interact with our military. Our military is letting them do what they do to humans, while counteracting the entire concept of the military itself, which is to defend the Bill of Rights, to defend the Constitution. So it's like a total clown world scenario right now, while we have this cover-up going on, Because if they're free to go around doing whatever they want to humans, and then we have our agencies and creepy ass weirdos at the agencies giving them people while paying and taking tax money to contribute to the cover up and make stupid movies like the Men in Black to make their jobs look cool when they're just fucking trafficking people. It's just, it's a total shit show right now.
Did you have a second question, Hermes?
I mean, I can ask a lot more questions, but I'm just gonna yield for now.
All right. Well, I'll fish out for one more question if anyone else has it. Going once. All right. I think that was a pretty good podcast. NSA, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, dude, I'll have more. I'll break it down. I'll do a write up on like false flag UFO stuff that's going on, because there's a lot. There's something that the Majestic 12 stuff that's briefly come out, that there's something called Project Majestic, which is to distract the public from the story of aliens at any cost. So there's billions and billions of dollars spent on disinformation, targeting certain people that are influential to then spread lies about spirituality and you know, the New Age revolution and all the stuff that was going on. New Age revolution is part of it too. I think anything New Age is playing off ancient ontologies and theologies that the aliens initially created thousands of years ago, but as some like weirdo, you know, 20-year-old stoner talking to the alien, they're going to believe in the, you know, breathe in that prana, baby, you know, like that kind of shit. They're going to believe in the esoterics because they want to, because they're trying to find their place in this reality, and you know, they're looking to our ancients to try and tell us it, and they manipulated that interaction that we had back then into doing something today through the New Age, you know, crystals and all that shit.
You should do a write-up like that. That would be sweet. I think that's a fantastic place to end it, though. So please subscribe on YouTube to the Roundtable Podcast YouTube channel. And if you are listening on there, please join the Roundtable Podcast Discord server, the Roundtable Discord server. Also check out our 4 other YouTube channels, our BitChute, and check out our merch store. Thank you so much, NSA, for coming on. This was a fantastic podcast. Thank you for our live audience for being here. We can now hop up to the Roundtable voice chat and just chat. Thank you so much.